Hello and welcome to this Edexcel GCSE Geography topic overview, and this one is looking at resources and energy. Remember, this is just a short review of the key information. It's not everything that you need to know and understand, and you should use these along with your class notes, revision guides and your own revision notes to improve your understanding. When you've watched this, have a go at making your own version of the mind map or other revision tools, or even have a go at making a video to improve your understanding. Now, as always, the first thing we do is we check the specification from the exam board to see the key terms and the key things that we need to be knowing. And you can see here two main parts. First of all, we look at the global and UK distribution of major resources, food, energy and water, and then we look more at detail in the energy resources. Now, in the exam, there will be two different questions. There will be one on energy and one on water. For us, we do not do the water section because we have studied energy. So make sure you read the instructions on the exam booklet and you only answer the questions that you need to. So here is the mind map in its entirety. We can see we start to look at the resource distribution, and then we start to look at the different elements of energy and the factors that influence it. So looking at resource distribution, first of all, we need to know what some of the main definitions and classifications of energy are. And this is really defined into abiotic, the non-living resources. Things like water, air, sunshine, things that we get from rocks, soil, fossil fuels, and the biotic, which are the living things, the plants and animals that we will use. We can also define them as renewable, things which, if we look after them, will always remain, or non-renewable. Okay, so things like fish, plants and animals, we might consider them to be renewable resources, but if we overuse them, then they won't be renewable. So we still need to take care even of renewable resources. But please note, when we're talking about energy, we define these slightly differently. Now, we need to look at the distribution in terms of global and UK, and you need some examples to know where some of these key resources are found. So fossil fuels are places like the Middle East, and it may be places like Venezuela and USA. Also, we can look at things like gas. We know that there is some gas from Russia and key ideas of that, so where it is found. Now, when we look at things like forestry, for the trees, for the water, for the soils, for agriculture, this is very much linked to climate. So it links to the physical side of climate, because you need to have the right growing conditions and the right kind of climate to have all of these resources available. And it's also important to recognize the use that we have for rocks and minerals and where we can find these different resources. Now, we also need to understand about the consumption of energy. Which are the countries which use the most food, energy and water? And these are dependent on a number of different factors. The population of a country. Obviously, those countries which tend to have a bigger population will tend to consume more of this. But it's also very much related to development and wealth. The richer countries, despite having smaller populations, might be using more of these resources. So it's very important to recognise those. And it's also important to recognise in the UK, where do we find most of the agriculture? For example, we don't find a great deal in the north of the country because the climate and the relief isn't suitable for it. But we also know in the UK, in terms of water, there is far more water in the north than there is in the south. And this leads to problems because the population is mainly concentrated in the south. Now, we also need to look at the exploitation of resources. So we need to know the different types of resources we can get from the environment, such as fossil fuels from in the ground, the fishing from the seas and the rivers, farming on the land, and deforestation. And what impacts can these have? And these main impacts can lead to reduced biodiversity. Linking into the ecosystem section, we can see that if we don't have enough plants because of deforestation and farming, then that's going to have an impact on biodiversity. It can lead to more soil erosion as we take away the plants which protect the soil, but also farming can deplete the soil from all its nutrients and make it no good. And also by exploiting resources, we can lead to pollution of the air and water. So that was the resources overview. We now look at the energy types. Now again, we can look at renewable and non-renewable. So the renewable energy types are those which, again, if we look after, will always be available. And if we harness them correctly, we can get a lot of energy. So we're talking about hydroelectric power from water, wind and solar, or non-renewable, which could be nuclear, coal, oil, natural gas, the fossil fuels. And it's important that we do understand just how, very basically, we get these and convert them into energy. For example, coal, oil and natural gas, we will burn to create heat, to heat water, to steam, to generate turbines. Whereas wind, we use the wind to turn a turbine to create electricity. We need to understand the production and the development of them. Now, the production is how we make energy from the resources, such as burning the coal to create heat, to heat water, to drive the turbines. But we also need to know about the development of resources. This is where we can improve or increase the capacity. So, for example, this might be wind farms, more power stations, or new resources. And we need to think about what are the issues that can arise from these. We also need to look in detail at fracking, as in what is it, how do we do it, and why do we do it? So it's basically where you drill into the ground, you pump fluid into it under pressure to break the rock apart, and then we can suck out the gas and the oil that's in there. And the reason that we're doing this now is because we're starting to run out of other types of fossil fuels, and it's become a lot cheaper because of technology to be able to do it. Now, each of these have a number of impacts. The non-renewable energies can have social and environmental impacts. Socially, it can provide jobs, but negatively, it can be expensive and it can lead to health issues. For the environment, there are no real positives of non-renewable because all they do is they can lead to climate change and water and air pollution. When we look at renewable energies, we can look at the positive and negative socially. So positives, it's a reliable source of energy, although it's not as reliable as non-renewable. And negatively, people might not like it because of the noise, etc. Whereas environmentally, it can still use the landscape up, but it's less polluting. Looked at the different types of energy, we're now going to look at the factors which can affect energy demand and consumption. Now, the factors which can influence demand are things like the amount of people in the country. Obviously, more people use more energy, the wealth and the levels of development. So obviously, if you've got more money, people are going to have more things to use energy, and as countries are more developed, they'll rely more on technology to help them out. But also, it can really depend on the access to the energy resources, which can link to the technology of it. Now, why has supply and demand increased over the last 100 years? Well, again, it's very similar. It's due to the increased wealth, the improved technology, the new ways to use energy, and the new ways to exploit energy out of it. Now, how have countries met this energy need? Well, this is something called the energy mix, and this is the different types of energy a country would use to supply its demand. And it can be classified as the mix between renewable and non-renewable and local or imported energy. So some countries don't have their own resources, so would have to import it from other countries. Now, in the UK, what we can see is that coal has been historically the biggest type of energy, but that is decreasing. But we're seeing other fossil fuels such as gas and oil increasing. Nuclear was going to be increasing, but there are changes in political views now as to what's going to happen with that. And also with the nuclear disasters, that's impacting opinion. So in 2014, over 80% of UK energy mix was non-renewable. Now we are trying to rely more on wind and solar power, and this is increasing rapidly, but the climate isn't always brilliant and it depends on how reliable that is. So we still need these other fossil fuels to give us energy when the wind isn't blowing or when it's long winter nights. What are the factors that can affect the mix of a country? Well, again, the factors affecting demand, so it could be population, wealth and development, but it's also the resources the countries have. If countries like India have a lot of coal, they will use coal for a lot of their energy. The climate can have a big impact as well. Okay, so countries with cooler climates, less sunshine or less wind won't be able to use wind and solar power. Whereas for these poorer developing African nations with plentiful sunshine, solar could be the answer for them. And the technology available is also important. Now it's also important to recognise the different attitudes to energies, and the exam board want you to focus on three key groups: individuals, organisation and governance. Now for the individuals, the attitudes to energy can vary on cost. People want something that's affordable. And in more developed countries, we're becoming more aware of greener energy, so less environmentally damaging. But still, cost is more important. So some people won't be happy with green energy if it costs too much. But also, if it affects them directly, so if they have wind turbines built in within their view, they may not be happy with it. Then we have the organisations. Now this might be TNCs, large companies, which might be the producers of the energy, so they want something that's cheap that they can make profit on, or big companies using the energy may want things which are cheap and reliable so their businesses can keep going. But there are some companies, such as McDonald's, who are trying to encourage more sustainable energy uses as part of their sales techniques. So using spent chip oil to fuel their vehicles or have energy efficient lights. Organisations can also include pressure groups such as Greenpeace, who would want to press for the environmental aspects of energy production. And then we have governments. Now the governments can have different views depending who's in charge. Some governments will want to focus on the environment and will invest lots of money into renewable energy. But some governments are more involved with protecting the oil producers. And they want to produce cheap, accessible and reliable energy. So they may focus more on traditional fossil fuels, regardless of the environmental impacts that they can put in. And we can see the differences there, the differences between President Obama in the USA, who was going for green energy, but then when President Trump then took over, he decided he didn't want to go that route and decided that he wanted to go back to using oil. Now the final part of this is looking at the case studies, and you're looking at an emerging and a developing case study. So you're looking at Germany, and again, use the revision guides for greater levels of detail. But at the moment, a quarter of their energy is renewable. They aim to reduce CO2 levels, and they've given incentives such as incentivizing producing renewable energy and having big solar parks. China traditionally used a lot of coal and was seeing nearly a third of all global CO2 emissions. But they are trying to rely on HEP, hydroelectric power, and solar energy as well. And this is all because of the changing government attitudes to energy. So there's your overview for resources and energy. I hope you found it useful. Please do look over your notes and your revision guides for greater detail, but I hope you found it useful. Thanks for watching. Don't forget the other videos in the series, and see you soon. Bye.